All right. A trio, a menage a trois, if you will, of nerds are in the house. Eric, how does it feel to be this far away from me now?
I mean,
buffer.
There is a buffer. I can sort of feel the lack of made up Twitter, YouTube comments sort of evaporating now that we have Kevin in between us now.
Now you have to make them up.
Well, the YouTube commenters will have a new target. I have a feeling. So I'll get their wrath this time instead of you guys.
It's going to be real hard. They really like to hate me.
So we found out so speaking of YouTube comments, we found out what George's YouTube burner is. His name is John Cullen, who says, Eric with the new haircut is what Travis Kelce might look like when he comes back to get his jersey retired in 15 years.
Is that a compliment, though?
Yeah, I feel like I would take Kelce 15 years out.
Okay.
I mean, 50 years, maybe. That's not so good. 15,
Yeah. I think that's a step up. So you've gone Roethlisberger, Rogan, Kelce. That is an ascension.
Well, and let's not forget Roethlisberger's, what was I called? His homeless brother one time?
Fat cousin.
Fat cousin.
Which is rough because can you imagine how fat you have to be Roethlisberger's fat cousin?
Well, evidently I'm living it every day.
I don't know. I think that's a step up for you.
Okay, well, great. I've been working out.
You know what was crazy? I was looking at the YouTube comments, and the first 5 were nice, and it really took me back.
You hate to see it.
So I think these people are trolling us. They're trying to see if they can get us feeling good about themselves, and I think Tim is going to come in along with Bryce Bernard and Robert Curtis and just hammer us. That's my thought, because they all had nice things to say. So Tim was people forget that Jesus was one of the first to establish the run, and he laughed at that, which makes 2 people that laughed at that joke in total in the universe. So thank you for the nice shout outs, though. We appreciate them.
The dry humor of these two gets me every time. Please release a pod about life. What would a podcast about life be between the 3 of us? Because I know, obviously, you and I have children, right? George doesn't, but George and I share the Cincinnati, the YMCA stories, whereas you live in New York, so it's a little bit different. But I feel like there wouldn't be enough overlap for really us to understand, to have a podcast that was fully about life.
Mm-hmm. What if you had to segment them out? So you would be politics guy. What would your subject matter expert regarding life be?
Just being a misanthrope, perhaps.
Okay.
But that's kind of your shtick, though. So
I have many shticks that I can play. I can just be the guy that doesn't have kids guy. That could just be me, and I could just make fun of. I could just talk about all the things that I do because I don't have kids, and not mention that it's because I don't have kids, and then you guys can enjoy that. I think that would be
I'd be suburban dad guy, whereas both of you guys live downtown where you live. So it would. I don't know. I don't think
comparing downtown Cincinnati to Manhattan is fantastic. By the way.
Just a little bit of difference in scale, I'd say.
We both hop on the subway with hundreds of screaming.
Whereas
people
I
go
to Subway to eat food.
Do you?
No.
Yeah, I didn't think so.
Don't let the facts get in the way of a joke.
All right. The history book reviews also had a real scalding take about Germany. So we apologize to our buddy who was missing, Moo, which turns out to be Mo. But Moo is so much more attractive, I think. History book reviews said the best part about Bavaria in Germany is that it is close to the Czech Republic, where the beer is even better and the women aren't horrid.
Just going to leave that one alone.
You hate to hear that.
Anyone been to the Czech Republic?
Stopsky has.
Thoughts? Oh. Anyone been to Germany?
I have not.
My PhD advisor was a German woman who was not horrid.
Okay, I was going to say. I don't know where that's going. Before we get to the Jalen Ramsey, Chris Jones thing that you want to talk about, the finals are tonight. And people love to hate when we're wrong. So to give them some fodder for this, your thoughts on Game 6?
I think the Raptors close it out. I'm going to be contrarian. I think they at least cover the 2.5, 3 points.
Okay. What do you think, Kev?
I think I'm gonna go with the same. I mean, it's been a pretty lopsided series, I would say, other than a couple of close Warriors victories. But it kind of depends on the refereeing in this game, I think.
Yes, I agree. I think the refs. I think they may just bring in Baron Davis and Steven Jackson to ref the game in Oakland. Here's the thing. So game 4,
Steven, like the running back, or Mark Jackson, the coach, or
limited
the
player
door's over there.
limited player knowledge over here.
So game 4 could have been the last game in Oracle, and if it had been, it was the saddest, most disgusting representation of a great basketball city that is Oakland. So they come back strong from this. They light Oracle on fire. They've got E40 dancing on Drake's grave at halftime as the entertainment. KD makes like a hologram appearance at midcourt or something crazy, and somehow they win.
What about, so this brings up a good question, I think. Is KD one of them?
Oh, Jesus.
You've already referred to Jesus a few times in this discussion. Am I that bad of a basketball mind?
I don't think he's one of them. I think there are 2 Warriors fans contingent. One of them which has embraced him, one of them which hasn't.
Yeah.
I think it's probably at best 50-50, but there's no doubt that the crowd is more excited. Everyone's more excited. KD's the outsider coming in, so.
Does he that's the question. Does he galvanize the people, like, is he seen as a mercenary that's just like helping them win titles? And
So yes, but people will forget all of those things because of what he just did, right?
Okay.
So he came out obviously in a situation where he could have re-injured himself. He did, and that.
I do think that changes his legacy in Golden State.
Yes. We'll just be a basketball podcast.
Look, win it for America, Golden State. Win it for America.
All right, Chris Jones, Jalen Ramsey, go.
Well, somebody said that Jalen Ramsey himself said that he's been told by the Jaguars that he's not getting a contract extension. So
this year,
me, a fan of the Chiefs. Chiefs don't have an outside corner on their team. Thanks to myself, the Chiefs should go after him. And then I looked at the schedule and saw that the Chiefs are playing in Jacksonville week 1 and said the Chiefs should trade the first 14 points of that game to the Jags for Ramsey.
What do you think?
Well, I mean, that doesn't seem like a lot to give up, quite honestly.
Well, that's a good. So we had Ramsey. He's about a win at his best, about a third of a win at his worst in terms of WAR. But 14 points is not a full win, and in fact, and then you'd also be thinking about multiple years, but then the contract extension. Like, what would you say if you were trading in points week 1? What would be a fair trade? I just threw out 14 just because
you're a Chiefs fan. That's why.
Well, I don't know. I think more in the neighborhood of a win, which would be 30 points, right?
Okay. So here's a good question.
What if you still lose this?
Yeah, that's what I was saying. So if you're Jacksonville, you give up your best defensive player to the Chiefs. How much do you have to spot Kansas City where you would be more than 90% sure you would win the game?
More than 90%.
30 sounds like a good number to me. Here's the thing. I think it rests on whether they get to keep Ramsey for that game or not. Because if they keep him for that game, then the 30-point lead feels better to me. But if Ramsey then goes to the other side where now you have like no shot of scoring because they now have a competent cornerback and you have Nick Foles, and Pat Mahomes now doesn't have to play against Jalen Ramsey, 30 points does not seem nearly as daunting to me anymore.
And the leverage in that game is not particularly high for Kansas City. There's still, I think, more than a 2/3 shot to make the playoffs, even if they lose that game. So, to me, I think it's like a pretty, I don't know, I would just give up that first game for Ramsey if I were the Chiefs.
So 30 points, you would do
30 points, yeah.
I mean, it would be interesting. Obviously, we've never seen a team knowing they're trailing 30 points with a full 60 minutes to go also. So Kansas City would probably be one of the most entertaining teams to see put in that situation.
Exactly.
They all of a sudden starts establishing the run.
So then the second question on this would, Chris Jones currently holding out of OTAs and mandatory minicamp. What would a fair trade be that involved Chris Jones and Jalen Ramsey?
It's interesting. I would certainly think that Jalen Ramsey has far more value. But the current construct of the league, I think, might be the reverse, where the defensive lineman is viewed so much more favorably. So I think it's not too far off from being sort of a straight up proposition.
Which would be an absolute steal.
Which would be an absolute steal, and we would think that we would have to give up, some compensation along with Chris Jones. But the NFL might feel the exact opposite, where it's like, well, now I have this malcontent Jalen Ramsey on my team, giving up, stand-up citizen Chris Jones, who's just going to, eat people alive in the trenches where the game is won in 2019.
I mean, we're talking about a team that drafted Taven Bryan over Lamar Jackson.
True.
So
they've invested a ton in their D-line, right?
But they got rid of Fowler last season in a trade in the midseason, so that you could make and then Yannick Ngakoue is sort of holding out, right? So this does seem like let us know if you want any more opinions. This looks like a great trade.
You're awful.
I think draft position is still going to play into this a little bit here, being that they're both, a few years out.
Yeah.
We're talking about a guy who's top 5 pick versus a second rounder. Probably have to give up a little bit extra, I'd say.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah. Anyway, it sounds like a pretty compelling thing for these two teams to be doing.
Does Jalen Ramsey feel like the defensive version of Odell Beckham a little bit here?
Where he's sort of viewed as a malcontent, but it's really nothing because he's not getting arrested.
It's really, well, your team sucks, so you can't talk about winning. So instead, we're going to talk about losing, and no one wants to do that. So let's blame the players who are,
the best on the team.
The best on the team.
Yeah. Well, you hate to see it.
But yeah, if he was on the New York Giants instead of on the Jacksonville Jaguars, probably the profile would be up there quite a bit.
Yes, and we'd have to get rid of him immediately.
So Kansas City's probably not. Kansas City's the favorite-ish, right? Betting markets. If they were to give up Jones for Ramsey, where would you put them as the clear favorite to win the Super Bowl in the NFL, or no? Or you'd still have to, because that is their one weakness, is they can't cover a $5 check right now. On the outside, of course, Matthew and Thornhill and Fuller are good on the inside, but they really can't cover on the outside.
I would say yes.
I think it's worth doing, don't you think?
Oh, the Tyreek Hill thing, though.
But it sounds like Tyreek Hill is, throw everything out, but it sounds like the Tyreek Hill thing is about as mitigated to the point that he'll play at least 12 games this year.
So
it's brutal, but that's like the way it is.
I would say yes. Then, what do you think, Kev?
I think so. Although it's always tough to tell how much one corner can make a difference.
Don't you? To me, it's like, okay, the favorites are, the Pats are up there, Saints are up there,
Eagles,
Chiefs, Eagles. So it's, the favorite is the favorite by a hair.
Yeah.
Anyway, so it's not like I'm saying, the Chiefs are, even money and everyone else is chasing their tail. It's like, I have to pick one of these 5. Who am I going to pick? Well, I'm going to pick the one with a quarterback who probably has the most upside.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Oh, so the Bears?
Can't wait. Let's get it. Patriots, Bears. An amazing game from week 7 of last season. The crazy thing that I forgot about this game was that the Bears, at this point, they were 3-2. It wasn't, and they end up losing this game. They go to 3-3. Everyone, their season ended up being so wonderful. Obviously winning 12 games.
They had one more loss, and it was against the Giants on the road with I was going to say Mitch Daniels, but it was Chase Daniel.
So, this game was interesting. I always like to try and think back about how did I feel about both teams at this time. I remember we were not really sold on the Patriots. They had that sort of disaster game against Jacksonville, which I think is so funny because the Bears and Jags defenses almost, the Jags passed the torch off and said, hey, you guys get all the turnovers this season, have this, crazy outlier defensive year. And the Patriots, with a mishmash of players, put up, 30 plus against the Bears. So I guess my question is, you watch this game, how much did this change your perception of the Patriots at the time?
I thought it was, because honestly, they didn't score 38. It was like 24 because of that. But at the same time, when you watch the game back, the Bears did not offer any resistance to the Patriots offense.
None.
I mean, and so like you could be fooled if you're a Bears fan into thinking, oh, our defense is still great. It was just a bunch of fluky plays, but you watch the game back and play for play, the middle of the field was wide open for the Patriots the entire time.
Without
Gronk. Yeah. I thought James White, this was James White's sort of probably best game of the year. Edelman was just coming off of the suspension. He played against, I think, Indy the previous Thursday night, but ultimately had a really good game here. And without a few like sort of fluky plays, I don't think the Bears are really in this game.
No, I agree. I mean, the fluky plays for the Patriots, they seem flukier because you had the kick return touchdown, you had the block punt for a touchdown, but the fact that they also fumbled the ball a couple times, that doesn't seem like a fluky play, but that's more of a, we're being deceived by the base rates. Still fumbles only happen 1% of the time, something like that on these plays. So those were big issues for them. So while they got the additional scoring from there, they also gave up a couple of possessions with the fumbles.
Yeah, and Brady threw an interception, which is sort of uncharacteristic for him. Patterson, you don't even see that many kickoff returns in the NFL, let alone ones that are fumbled. And then it was in complete Bears fashion. You saw the fumble went straight into the arms of a player on the kicking team there. So it was strange. As you sort of walk through this game, what was the first thing, the first thing that jumped out to my mind about the Bears offense was how often Trubisky was able to sort of overcome his inaccuracy by picking up first downs with his legs, right? I mean, he had the 2 huge runs, but it was more of a consistent thing for him.
Yeah, I mean, he put up amazing numbers. I mean, if you look at the expected points added that he had in the game, I mean, he had more expected points added running the ball than Brady did passing the ball. He was extremely effective, and even the plays that don't stand out to you, but these first down pickups on 3rd and 5 or 3rd and 6, he did that at least a couple of times. He picked up third downs that weren't the long touchdown runs. I mean, those are massively important as far as keeping the drives alive, keeping expected points going. So we had those, and I think we have a tendency to overlook those because they're not necessarily as consistent going forward, and that's not what a quote-unquote franchise quarterback you're expecting, you're hoping for, like you were hoping from Brady throwing for those first downs. But for that particular game, and looking back, those are extremely important, and that's one of the reasons they were in it as much as they were.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, of course, like 2 players, one of them that we've been touting like sort of the whole time, which is Tariq Cohen, sort of a top 10 running back in terms of WAR. He was as good as White was in terms of turning, he had 10 targets. He turned them into, he turned them into 8 catches, a touchdown, really, he had that one at the end of the half that sort of inflated his numbers, but he was really sort of everything we came to expect from him. And then Trey Burton, right? So the middle of the field seemed to be wide open in this game for the Bears. Trey Burton was really the recipient of the majority of Mitch Trubisky's good, accurate passes over the middle. I believe he had like 126 yards on 11 targets with a touchdown. He made a really nice play on the outside of the field for his touchdown on sort of a fade route that Trubisky capitalized on. So there were some good things for him for Trubisky in the passing game, but it was to the backside of the backfield and then the tight end.
Yeah, his accuracy was funny because it was the thing that we hear from the Bears often is, well, look, when the chips are down, when we need him to come through, he comes through. And my note on their, I think it was second to last drive, was this is why Trubisky is the GOAT. Because he comes out the series before and just like overthrows 3 straight passes. Yep. Then has to deliver, and he's throwing darts, all over the field. And those are the plays that we remember because it's like, well, this is like the ultimate or penultimate drive of the game. This is what I pay my quarterback for. And we forget that he tried to throw 2 picks in the end zone. We forget that he sailed passes left and right, that he had less than 50% of his passes were actually accurate throws, that almost a third of his passes were uncatchable throws, which over the course of the game is going to put you behind as it did here. But then you have this glimpse of hope. You get an end of the half long pass play. You get an end of the game long pass play. The aggregate numbers look a lot better than they probably should. And that's how you come away from this game, which ultimately was a loss, feeling as though it wasn't the quarterback's fault.
Yeah, not a ton of pressure generated by the defense for New England. Trey Flowers had 6 pressures, but no sacks, no hits. Trubisky, there were a few times
I thought they were really effective, though. That one of the things,
the pressures they got were really effective on Trubisky for sure.
I thought they did a great job, even when it wasn't pressure, of confusing what he was looking at, like right in front of him. So they blitzed him 25 times, and 4.2 yards per play on blitzes, 8.8 without a blitz. So even when they weren't getting pressure, it seemed to me like there was a lot of.
But and this is like, Steve talks about this all the time. Wasn't more about like it depends upon how many wins you get as a pass rusher, not necessarily how bad your losses are. But there were a ton of times where I wrote Trubisky had all day, overthrew somebody. Sure. Trubisky had all day, overthrew somebody. So it wasn't. I do agree that the times that they got to him, it was often sometimes late, and then it would force an errant throw from Trubisky. Sometimes it was right away. But there were times where Trubisky had all day, and it didn't seem to matter. He was still inaccurate. So, that's a good point. They were effective on their pressures that they did get.
Couple of interesting things in this game. The Bears. It seemed like the fluky plays kind of evened out, but it was just the timing of them, which speaks to the volatility of some of these things, at the NFL level, particularly turnover luck, right? Not only can you get lucky with turnovers and converting them, but you can get lucky with when they happen or when your kick return happens, right? So if you reverse those two fluky plays for each team, and you put, the Patriots get the good side of it in the first half and the Bears get the good side of it in the second half. Like, to me, that's such a huge part of it as well, is just when these things happen, because it's like we talk about with WAR, right? So a guy can be worth one win on average, but in the right season, those tenths of a win can show up at the right time, and you feel like, we won 8 games because Khalil Mack had all these strip sacks at opportune times.
Yeah, and right, it's that way in games. It's that way in seasons, right? Like, so Khalil Mack's one WAR for the Raiders is not worth as much in terms of, you go from 4 wins to 5 wins. The touchdown drive that Trubisky had, usually at that end of the game usually isn't worth as much as the one in the middle of the game, because you're coming back from 14 down. You're just really getting yourself back into the conversation as opposed to taking the lead. That's a really good point. And what I liked about the Patriots in this game is that they sort of responded to every punch the Bears threw, right? So you had the Jordan Howard touchdown after they sort of gave the Bears chance after chance, and then Cordero Patterson runs back the ensuing kickoff, and then they go 3 and out basically on Trubisky, and then they get the ball back, and then James White had his dominating drive where he ends up tearing apart Leonard Floyd on a touchdown route, and then they take the lead, right? And then they basically controlled the game from there on out.
Yeah, I thought there were a couple of interesting strategic decisions that went on there. One in particular where the Bears in the first half, they had the ball 3rd and 8 from their own 34-yard line, and they ran the ball out of that set. They got 4 yards, and then they went for it almost immediately. And in my opinion, this was something, I've heard this term on a podcast. It was Rob Likens, who was the OC for Arizona State. He used this thing called attack 3rd down, and that's a 3rd down where you're in a position of the field, it's at a distance where you're going to go for it on 4th down, barring catastrophe on 3rd down. So for me, that really felt like they knew they were going to go for it, or else why would you run the ball on 3rd and 8? And I liked it a lot. I thought that was a strong strategic decision to go ahead and do that. Because who knows? You could even pick it up. It was a Cohen run, so you might be able to pick it up just by catching him off balance. But at the same time, there's no delay. There's no waste in time. You're just getting to the line. You're going again. You're going for it on 4th down, and you're ready to go. And I thought that was very, very crucial. And then they eventually ended up, marching down the field, and interception in the end zone's dropped, but they ended up converting it for a touchdown.
Well, and we've heard that when we talk to coaches, we talk to analytics people, like that is how they think, right? When the ball is had on 1st down, they're telling the OC, or the OC's telling somebody in the coaching staff, hey, this is 4 down territory, and so then they call their plays according to that. That was interesting because it was on their own end. But we talked about this with the Super Bowl with the Pats and the Eagles, which you get a stop on 3rd down in that run, the defense sort of exhales a little bit and possibly psychologically isn't necessarily ready for that 4th down that comes subsequently. So yeah, very cool. That was a good look.
I thought this was it's a great example of, I thought throughout this game, Nagy's addition to this team really shined through. His play calling was, I don't want to say that it covered up a lot of Trubisky's mistakes, but it felt like every time there was a bad overthrow, the next play was an easy gadget play. Like I can't remember if it was in the first half or the second half, but they were in the red zone and it was like god awful throw by Trubisky. Next play, screen to Cohen, scores. Right? It's like I'm gonna make sure that I'm gonna you feel confident at least that if you make a mistake, it's okay.
Yeah.
And this was a good example of where his decision making came to play. We talk a lot about running on 2nd and long being a terrible decision. Here, it's interesting that it's 3rd and long, and because the defense is always thinking pass here, you get an opportunity to leverage a run play where you avoid catastrophe. You know you're going for it, and you set up the 4th down play, which so much of going for it on 4th down is just knowing you're going to do it and being prepared for it. Because if it catches you off guard, that's probably a bad thing for your chances of success. And obviously, it helped.
Well, and it was interesting because we always used to remark about, when Nagy was the offensive coordinator with Kansas City, how Alex Smith was not a good not a brilliant quarterback, but he never looked bad. He never looked like he was out of water. What do you mean?
All right.
Well, like he never flailed around the way that like a Bortles would, and do you think that was because of these play calls that like never put him in?
Oh, you're talking about in Kansas City.
In Kansas City, he never looked like I was
going to say there's some games before he went to Kansas City.
No. I'm talking about
it wasn't so pretty.
I'm talking about the situations that you're describing where when you start to see the wheels fall off, the offensive coordinator does a good job of putting that player in position for the offense to look functional, even though the quarterback may not be the best player in the world. And I think that might be what is, because we're privy to the play-by-play grades, and we're never, Trubisky never looks like a terrible quarterback here, even though his fundamentals aren't great. And I think that is a credit to Nagy and goes back to the Kansas City days where, Smith was never brilliant, but he never looked like he was hurting his team on a play-for-play basis.
Andy Reid did it with Michael Vick. Now Nagy doing it with Mitchell Trubisky, basically the same thing.
I mean, I think Alex Smith is probably a little bit more risk averse generally. Yeah. You could say that about Trubisky, but every game, including this game, he throws some balls that you're just shocked that it didn't get intercepted. I mean, this is the question about Chicago going forward, right? Is this a play calling situation where you can see a continuation of what we expect not to continue, which is the ability to convert high leverage plays despite the fact that generally the grading is much lower than the results? Can that continue on for another season? Yeah. We like to put things that we can't explain on coaching quite a bit, and we could be doing that to a degree here, but there are some real tangible things that you can say, okay, maybe coaching really is having an impact. It's probably somewhere between coaching is doing it and the fact that it's all variance.
Yeah, and that's a good point. And so the question, and then so next season, if the Bears are, let's say they're 500, we probably shouldn't go and say, oh, the brilliance of Matt Nagy was really a fraud. We should probably throttle back a little bit and say, well, all of 2018 wasn't necessarily how great he was. It's somewhere in between. I do agree with you, the Alex Smith comparison is weird because Alex Smith was sort of like this sneaky good runner at times. Same with Trubisky, but you're right. Alex Smith was more of a check down Charlie than Trubisky certainly has been.
Trubisky, less than 50% of his throws were accurate. Brady had one game all season where less than 60% of his throws were accurate. It was a funny game to watch the comparison between the two because obviously Trubisky's big wins were with his legs. So I really tried to ignore those and look at the passes. And I was kind of thinking to myself, that the Bears could easily won this game. I wonder how many other times Trubisky was sort of like this bad and they end up winning. So he had 3 games this year where less than 50% of his throws were what we call accurate. So on the receiver's frame, perfectly in stride. 2 of those were wins. The Rams game where he was disastrously bad, as was Goff. And then the week after this against the Jets.
And that Jets game was just a slog where the Jets just didn't want to play well. Yeah,
it was rough. But he managed to go, 2 for 3 on games where less than half of his passes were accurate. A guy like Tom Brady had one game, never had a game all season where that was the case, had only one where less than 60% of them were. Trubisky, only 5 total games where he was above 60% accuracy. If you had to say next season, let's say that Bears fans again think Trubisky was successful. What is the reason that happens?
I think that they employ some sort of deep, they kind of Jameis light, where they when you throw the ball deep on a regular basis, you don't have to be as pinpoint, right? Because it's kind of Cam Newton-ish. It's kind of Jameis, Carson Palmer. I think if they sort of lean into that and then they supplement it with throws like they had, in this game where, Burton was over the middle catching wide open passes, I think that's where they can be successful. If you rely on him to be like Brady or to be perfect underneath, that's just really not in the cards for him, I don't think.
What do you think?
I just don't know if it could happen, quite honestly. I mean, we'll have to see. It's weird. I mean, he can look accurate. He can make some decent throws sometimes, but it's just not happening that much. I mean, maybe if they really relied even more heavily on a screen game sort of system, but it sounds like with what they did in the draft, obviously, that who knows if Cohen will even be as involved as he was last year, which in my opinion is a big mistake. I wish they would have just drafted another Tariq Cohen type of player and just rotate those guys, but they're trying to get more of a workhorse back, so we'll see what ends up happening.
I'm so proud of Kevin. He's only been here for a month, and he's already that's how you know that this isn't indoctrination here. The Trubisky facts are facts, I think. Yeah.
I'm curious as to whether he continues to run the way he's run. He is mobile. And he can't throw on the run to save his life, so that's a little bit of an issue.
He tucks the ball in his left hand right away. And granted, he's controlled when he runs. He's not like an idiot like Bortles or something.
I was legitimately impressed with his feel. It wasn't like he was just immediately running. He had a good sense of when to take off, and maybe that's self-awareness on his part, knowing I have a better chance of scrambling for this first down than throwing to my third read and hitting it type deal. And I'm very curious to see if that continues this year, because you hear continually, he got injured. We got to protect him. He's got, you got to know when to risk it, when not to. Sometimes I worry you take the one thing that he does really well out of his hands, and now it's oh boy.
Yeah, I mean, because we've seen that with Dak. We've seen that with other RG3. We saw that where you try to throttle back on the thing because you're worried about him being hurt, and he might as well just be hurt because you're taking away a lot of his value. Trubisky, that I will say this, so we're going to say something positive about him. When he runs the football, it is very good. He's controlled. He sets up his blockers really well. We saw that on his long run that wasn't a touchdown. He is very good there. He does not run. He's not aimless when he does it. He is very natural at doing it, and so you wonder how sustainable that is, because I came away very impressed with the way that he acts when he has the football as a runner.
Speaking of workhorse back, would you rather, if you had one quarterback and you had to have them run say 15 times a game, Josh Allen, Mitch Trubisky, which one?
Oh, Mitch.
Look at this Mitch praise.
Yeah.
I mean, Allen physically maybe could take the pounding a little bit better, but he's shown a little bit less awareness, and I don't think it was a surprise that he got injured. I mean, he literally tried to hurdle a linebacker. He did hurdle a linebacker.
A 6'5" linebacker.
So that's something that's going to look good once, and then the other 5 times you try it, you're going to be out for 3 weeks. So I'm not...
Trubisky.
We give Trubisky a lot of crap, but he's a better thrower than Josh Allen. So.
True.
And we haven't really found a lot to correlate quarterback size to how often they get injured when they're scrambling. I mean, if you're Lamar Jackson and you're actually running plays, then there's probably a correlation there. But if you're scrambling, it's more about knowing how to avoid contact and how to avoid the hits.
Yep.
Which I think for the Bears fans to rightfully say, Trubisky had a good season this year, he's got to double down on that. Bar none, I think. Thoughts on a game for next week? I found this game to be the most boring of the games that we have watched so far. I was less impressed than I thought I would be.
Yeah. Okay, well, so we've already done a Patriots game, Bears game, Vikings game, Rams game, Colts, Texans, Falcons, Saints.
And I know which game I want to do. I'm curious your thoughts. Kev, what was the game we think we spend too much time together? You think back to last season, you're like, that was a game that I remember. It was interesting to me. Can't quite remember exactly all the things I learned from it.
It's tough to say. I mean, I'm trying to think of. I mean, I ended up watching a decent amount of the Browns games once Mayfield took over, but I'm trying to think of what was a good game that he had, because some of the best games that he had weren't really that exciting. I mean, the Texans game was interesting, but it was all from behind, so it wasn't like he was dropping dimes, but it didn't really matter that much. I mean, the Baltimore game was interesting, of course, but that's something that really sticks in everyone's mind because that was right at the end of the season. Yeah.
So was Baltimore, Kansas City.
Yes, Baltimore, Kansas City
was a good game.
We haven't done either of those two teams.
Yes, I have a few other thoughts. I miss Boog personally. So Rams Chiefs comes to mind.
Yeah.
But also Chiefs Patriots. And I thought of this, doing a sort of a double dip.
A menage a trois and a double dip at the same time. See, we can't do that. We already cut analytical edging as a segment. We can't.
We need to bring that back. That's what we should have done with Kev here. God, sorry. I apologize. You watch Chiefs Patriots regular season and then Chiefs Patriots.
Well, Kev did bring up the Browns. What if we went Browns Chiefs at one point too? That was a pretty compelling game.
I'm not sure it was, honestly.
Okay. Well,
I think the Browns got dealt with pretty handily.
But for the Browns fans in the stands, they get to see Kareem Hunt for the last time.
I just remember a lot of Mahomes, Kelsey touchdowns, and that was kind of that was the first. I think that was the first Freddie Kitchens games where they were still awful. So there wasn't necessarily a switch over immediately, which everyone was attributing that. So
I do like George's idea of watching both and seeing sort of the differences in the approach. Since one of them was a pick that we had, we can sort of go over our analysis of it.
Let's do it.
Let's do it. All right. You're gonna stick the knife in my Chiefs fandom. 2 losses.
Get over it.
But
we haven't spent enough time on Jimmy G this offseason.
Well, we could do Vikes Niners from week 1.
Don't.
George Kittle dropping an 80-yard touchdown.
All right.
Not covering the spread, but
That's how I knew the season was off to a bad start. I'm watching that game. I'm like, this just isn't going to work out for me. It's not going to be good.
You can have Niners Chiefs where they were down, I think 35-0 in the first half or something.
Or
like that.
the one Niners game we got right, which was
Niners Lions.
Lions +6 down 17 with 4 minutes left and backdooring it with 2 touchdowns.
Matty Stafford. Yeah, that'll be fun. All right. We are onward to the Minnesota Vikings. I'm going to let you do a lot of the talking because I have heard so many Vikings takes from you. I just feel like the people need to hear them.
What was the most memorable part of the Vikings season for you?
For me?
Yeah. I think I know this answer.
It's a good question. There are a couple of memorable ones, but I think you know that I have a particular affinity for social awkwardness and not getting it. And so Kirk Cousins' huddle pump-up speeches.
Oh, I thought you were going to go with something else. Okay.
Are so awesome to me because it sums up everything about Kirk Cousins into one beautiful picture.
So what
were you going to say?
I was going to say, since we both owned Vikings under 10 and Seahawks over 7.5, you and I went out for steak.
It was what I mentioned, and then them getting drilled by the Bills.
The Monday night game when we're at the bar and no one understands why I'm wearing I think I was wearing a Vikings beanie or something.
Might have been a Chiefs beanie actually.
And I'm rooting for the Seahawks because that would have hit both the under and the over. And the whole time I was just making fun of Minnesota and their ineptitude and the people at the bar not being awkward, not really getting it.
Yeah.
But I mean, this was an interesting one.
I want to start with this, and then I'll let you go on your merry way with the Vikings. Kirk Cousins' season, was it what you would expect, better than you would have expected, or worse than you would have expected?
On average, it was exactly what I expected. But the season had sort of two sides of it that were different, right? So first half of the season, I thought Kirk Cousins played extremely well. And he was accurate. He was efficient. That offense was humming at times. There was that blip against Buffalo, but basically they were pretty efficient until I think the New Orleans game, when everything sort of turned over and he became super conservative. And you saw that when they lost to New England on the road, they lost to Seattle, where he just wouldn't pull the trigger. They didn't get a lot of protection. They sort of blamed a lot of things on the run game, which was kind of BS. The offensive coordinator did not do a good job. And so on average, I thought he did fine relative to my expectations, but it was sort of weird in the way it ended up.
I mean, I think they had the worst efficiency running game in the first half of the season. So when you say blame things on the run game, they should have been blaming the run game for being so bad, but instead, as your Boog would say, or not Boog, I'm sure someone said all the attempts, maybe it was Bucky Brooks, only the attempts matter.
Nope, that's chapter 1, verse 1, the book of Boog.
Oh, it is Boog. Okay, so I was right the first time.
I think they both said it actually, but Boog actually said it on air.
Yeah. So efficiency, yards per carry doesn't matter. All that matters is how many times you're rushing the ball. So I think that hamstrung them. And once they decided, in particular in that Seattle game, because I'm not sure if that was the week after. That
was right before John D. Flobo got fired.
It was before. So, but the message was out. Word was on the streets that you better run the ball. And there were so many times in that game where they were running the ball on first and second and long, and we saw the results, and it was not pretty.
Yeah. So just speaking of that, a season ago, the Vikings offensively were 25th in expected points per play, 23rd in expected points in the passing game, 29th rushing the football. The last one is, of course, bad, but I will bring up the season prior in 2017 when they were 13-3 and made the NFC title game. They were 7th in EPA per play, 2nd passing, 23rd rushing. So they were not a good rushing team the season before. What they were was, and they weren't that good of offensive line. I believe Case Keenum had the same pressure rate as Kirk Cousins, maybe even a little higher. But where Case Keenum excelled was that he turned pressures into sacks at a rate only eclipsed by Phillip Rivers, right? Phillip Rivers was the only one at avoiding sacks better than Case Keenum. So that was where they struggled, and very Kirk Cousian in terms of his ability not to, to take sacks when pressured. But sort of an interesting, they were not efficient defensively. I think a lot of people after that Rams game said the defense wasn't very good this season. They took a step back, but really in terms of expected points, they were second to the Bears, second in allowing passing and 8th in allowing rushing. So their defense was still pretty good. I think speaking to Mike Zimmer, who's been a top 5 defensive coach as long as we've, sort of measured such a thing. So, can their offense improve is really the big question going into 2019.
I mean, I think one of the more interesting things with Cousins is, what if Case Keenum did not land a starting quarterback job somewhere else where he didn't look horrible, but he didn't look great, right? So, obviously, if he stayed as a backup in Minnesota, that would have been very interesting midway through the season. But even if he wasn't a backup there, if he just didn't have a chance to show that he's not that good coming off of the season that they did have, I think people's perception of Kirk Cousins might be even worse than it was, because they would have nothing to downgrade Keenum on based upon what was, like you mentioned, on these high leverage plays. He was extremely efficient, which obviously isn't stable, but people are going to look back and they say, hey, this is a 13-3 team with this guy at quarterback. Cousins really isn't that good. Where they couldn't quite say that when he went to Denver, and ultimately, he's been shipped out of town, so he failed.
Yeah, so he's not good at. Yeah, right. So folks are going to say, well, what was the Vikings' best option? Teddy Bridgewater was only able to get two backup jobs, right, essentially. Case Keenum struggled. Now he's the backup in Washington theoretically. So Cousins was the best option. This is the best we have to work with. And I think what folks fail to realize is, for these quarterbacks that are sort of middle of the pack, it's not the ordering is not, it's not well ordered, right? Like, Cousins can be better than Keenum at a lot of things, but worse than him in a thing that for the Vikings offense could tank the whole offense, right? You could be better than him in arm strength, accuracy, decision making, etc. But if you handle pressure worse than him and your offensive line is one of the worst in the leagues, Keenum could be a better fit for that offense. And so that's an interesting thing, because we always look at this: is this player better? Yes, then we should have him, right? And pay that money for him.
Well, also Keenum could have had an absolute catastrophe of a season this past year with the Vikings. I mean, that's
because Shermer went to the Giants and they really started to get
possible. Along. The guy was it's perfectly summed up by the miracle that happened in the playoffs. That was the type of season that Case Keenum had. He was pulling lightning rods out of his butt.
Well, and he gave the Saints back that game by throwing that off the back foot interception, and then ultimately against the Eagles, he threw the pick six to Patrick Robinson. You're absolutely correct. Interestingly, with Minnesota, you look at this offseason, they didn't have a ton of cap space because of the Kirk Cousins deal, certainly foreshadowed. They got Anthony Barr back, which is strange, right? He wanted back in Minnesota, took a little bit of a pay cut, but ultimately probably cost the Vikings more than they were willing to pay at linebacker. They got Shamar Stephen. They lost Sheldon Richardson. And then in the draft, they went completely offense, but maybe in the wrong spots. Garrett Bradbury at center, Irv Smith at tight end, and Alexander Mattison, the delight of Saturday evening Mountain West D-Gens as the running back for Boise State.
How stoked were you about that draft?
It's a lot of 7th round picks to choose from. So if you're a draft Nick, you probably liked their draft because these guys should have been 2nd round picks. Of course, not great track record for 7th round picks in the NFL, but we'll see what happens.
Yeah, they certainly did that with, you look at, I think the sharper teams are trading those later round picks for players or future picks, which are higher in the draft. The Vikings opted for later round picks in that immediate draft, which we, as you said, are basically dart throws at that point.
Basically UDFAs, right? It's like there's no difference there.
Yeah, so, priority UDFAs, essentially.
I think the Vikings missed a huge opportunity in the draft. Garrett Bradbury, we didn't have him necessarily as that high, but also for position scarcity, they were at a point where it fell perfectly with them. You had a bunch of tackles available. They struggle at tackle with Riley Reif kind of being average. Brian O'Neill sort of off an encouraging rookie year, but certainly not brilliant. And they were in a position possibly to trade back. And instead, they just said, well, we're going to go with the guy we like immediately here and get Bradbury at 18. I didn't think that was a great value. Irv Smith is intriguing, but then they just signed Kyle Rudolph to an extension that has him basically guaranteed money for the next 2 years. So I wonder how much of an impact, he will have even relative to the low expectations of a rookie tight end.
Can't have enough tight ends.
Well, with some of these, the Vikings are getting into a little bit of a cap. I mean, it's not cap hell because these players are still playing well. The problem is when these guys aren't playing well. And I think there's a little bit of a misconception with the cap. There's always, the cap doesn't matter. It doesn't exist. And the reason that people say that is because, like you're seeing with Kyle Rudolph, what you can do is you can extend people and actually lower their cap hits.
Right.
But the problem is you're pushing this further into the future. Yeah. And what ends up happening to the team, it's not that you can't fit them in, but you end up getting like a barbell roster where you have a bunch of really high paid players. And then, you can find the other players, but you're not going to find players in the, let's say, $1 to $5 million a year sort of range where you can actually get surplus value and where they may be undervalued. You're going to be going on all these really cheap players, and everyone's looking for cheap players. So you're not necessarily going to find the value there. And that's the problem as these contracts aged. I feel like the Vikings haven't done a good job. Well, one of the hardest parts of the NFL is after you've hit on your draft picks, what do you do? And what they've decided to do is to sign everyone to a big deal, a backloaded contract, and just hope that you can continue to push it down the road.
The Patriots have done that with great success.
Well, especially defensively, where we know that defense is pretty random. So like Xavier Rhodes in 2016 and 2017 was pretty good. 18, one of their least valuable players according to our WAR metric, right? Like Harrison Smith has been a terrific player, right? But he does so many things, and he's getting a little bit older, right? So when Harrison Smith falls off, he's worth a lot of money, right? And you have to pay him, and that's the issue. And I think people who say the cap doesn't matter are often only looking at the blinders that their particular team lives within, right? So if you're the Vikings, all you really care about is, are we going to get Anthony Barr back, or are we going to, Sheldon Richardson or Shamar Stephen or, Kyle Rudolph, when in reality, they've closed off so much of the possibilities for themselves in the offseason that we only say the cap doesn't matter because they can make the small amount of moves that we think are possible for them, right? They're not even able to do some of the things that these other teams are doing, which you would describe pretty well.
You have to factor injuries into there. I mean, how thin are you going to be with a team like this too if a couple of those guys down? I mean, I think they had to do this.
The Warriors.
Well, the Warriors are actually illustrative of the fact of the Warriors a few years ago versus the Warriors today. I mean, look at their bench today, right? And because they've had to re-sign these guys to big deals.
Sean Livingston is an injection of youth hormone away from being back to his normal self.
Terrence Newman eventually retired, though.
The other weird thing is teams fans and people that say, oh, like the cap doesn't matter, they only think this year. Mm-hmm. That's I think the biggest. So when I look at a contract, or I hear that this team has signed a contract, the first thing I think about is, what does this contract look in three years, right? And no one ever thinks that. The first thing they look at is like, well, what's happening this year? I've got this, I've got D Ford, thank God, right? Or like, I've got this new player and I've got him this year, and that makes this year better. And that's all they care about. And that's what I think the Patriots have done really well, is they have thought about every signing they make from what does this look like each year of the contract? And the Vikings are in a rough spot, because if you look in you say, let's take these next 5 years and look at them, it's very sort of, well, we don't actually have a quarterback that we're paying money for, a quarterback that we're supposed to have, right? Like that's going to get us there to the promised land and make up for those other players that we're not going to sign. To me, it's not as rosy a picture as they would hope.
Okay, so let's talk about the market on the Vikings right now. So, their over-under currently is at 9 wins, so win below last season. We got a lot of flack for saying that the under 10 last year, coming off of 13-3, was a good play.
Idiots.
Here
can only improve.
Here, the over is a little bit juiced at -120. It's even money to bet the under. We would say, you're probably talking about over 9 wins about a third of the time, under 9 wins about half the time, and then the rest of the time you're talking about exactly 9 wins. So not a ton of value. I think this is priced well. Super Bowl odds 25-1, basically, where we would have them as well. So if you have to go, you have to pick one, over under. What are you going with? Under, because that
shock of the century.
But
there.
The thing is, so that division,
way
in that division we have the Vikings, Bears, and Packers all within about 0.4 of a win,
right?
And I think I like that, right? Because again, the Bears have the question mark with.
Do you like that?
The Bears have the question mark with the quarterback.
Like that.
The Packers have the question mark with head coach and how Aaron Rodgers is going to respond. The Vikings, they have the 12th toughest schedule, 10th hardest in opposing offense, 10th hardest in opposing defense. They don't have an easy road here. Detroit, right? Detroit they infused a little bit of talent. Matthew Stafford is just one season away from basically having 3 winning seasons in 4, right? That team stunk last season, but 7 or 8 wins isn't out of the possibility for them. So, I just think it's so jumbled that your best bet is to say one of these teams is going to suck, and there's a pretty decent chance it's the Vikings.
Okay, so under. You, sir.
Yeah, I think I'm going to have to go under also. It's a weird situation, and I think it's good. It matches up with my intuition, the fact that we feel like it's pretty well priced here, because people are pretty low on Cousins, despite the fact that they have this solid core. I just get worried about these teams that I feel like a couple of injuries, I don't know what's going to end up happening, especially, on the offensive side of the ball, too. Now you have Thielen and Diggs, both of them are pretty big contracts. The question is really going to be what happens a couple years down the road, but even for this year, I just feel like they're going to be pretty thin, and I don't know if Cousins is the type of player that can transcend what could end up happening to them.
Yeah, and we've hardly, so
both those guys have gotten hurt.
Yeah, Thielen
Diggs in particular has had a long track record, and going all the way back to college. That's one of the reasons that he fell to the 5th round, is he had so many injury problems at Maryland.
Yeah, Thielen has been more of the guy that gets hurt and plays through it, is less effective. Diggs is the one that misses football games. Last season was the first year Diggs was over 1,000 yards, but again, he was a 10-yard a catch guy, very emblematic of the way in which Kirk Cousins changed that offense in terms of in more a conservative play. So then you look to them, okay, do they have a third option at that receiver spot? They do not.
I'm sorry. Take that back.
Chad Beebe? Don's son? Jordan Taylor?
Look, they have a third option. It may not be a great option. They have a third option.
LaQuantosaurus Rex? So that's where the tough part is. Irv Smith is a rookie tight end. And
a young rookie tight end. And that's why I didn't get the Kyle Rudolph talk. I guess we found out that it was an actual negotiating ploy and not a reality, because I didn't understand how this team that you've going all in, right? That you're going to say, oh, you know what? We're going to let Rudolph and we're going to plug in a 20-year-old tight end, a position that's typically slow to develop.
Yeah. So there. Dalvin Cook's a player, offers a lot of value out of the backfield as a receiver, but really that offense is very top heavy. So if anything goes wrong there, then you're talking about Kirk Cousins' later years with Washington, where, once that supporting cast shrinks a little bit, he kind of shrinks with it. So
yes. You made a couple of the points that I was going to make. I'm going to go under as well. I actually think that Cousins played as well as I would could have expected him to play. I thought he played pretty darn well. He was top 10 in almost every accuracy metric that we have. Basically middle of the pack from a clean pocket and under pressure, which is what you'd expect from a guy that's literally defined by middle of the pack. Like, that's who he is. And it's tough because you're like, well, the Bears probably won't be as good. The Lions aren't great. The Packers definitely have some weaknesses. But the idea that they're going to win 10 wins, like they win 10 games, is just, no, I'll take the under on that every single time. And here's the kicker. You were mentioning this the other day, right? Kirk Cousins comes on. They're like, so, a lot of people are saying that you didn't have as good a year as you should have last year. What do you say to that? And his response being, well, it doesn't matter. If my stats get worse and we win games, they'll say I was a better player and all this stuff. And you just hear that and you go, this guy's so far in his own head. It just doesn't matter. One thing goes wrong, it's a disaster.
I like the self-awareness from him, but the problem is I don't think he'll handle the newfound facts well.
If you're actually self-aware, you don't say that in the public eye. Tom Brady's never getting that obviously phased.
To close on Cousins, I think here's the thing to me that Mike Zimmer has never liked his quarterback other than the brief time he had Bridgewater, but he talked crap about Keenum to the press a lot. He talked a lot of flack, about Cousins. And what we saw with Kirk was that he fundamentally altered the type of quarterback that he was. He was 31st last season in percentage of throws were positively graded. He was third in limiting negatively graded throws. So he became this risk-averse quarterback to try to please Mike Zimmer, who's a defensive-first guy, does not want to see sort of anything associated with risk from his quarterback. And that's simply not how you win games, by being that polarizing in terms of, limiting positively graded throws and limiting negatively graded throws. It's just not the way to do it, especially when, as Kevin said, you invested so much money in those top two receivers that should be making your money play in and play out.
I agree. Anything else on the Vikings? That was too much Vikings for me.
Look,
I never need to talk about the Vikings again.
Okay, let's talk about the Cincy Y, George.
Let's do it. I have 3 stories. I'd like you guys to choose your favorite. Story number 1. This is a story from the gym at my apartment.
Ooh.
Which is like not the normal apartment gym. Normal apartment gym is very small. This one like pretty large, so you can get a decent number of people in there. And there is a couple that goes and works out together, and it's a little awkward because like it's very clear that the wife works out a lot and she just sort of drags the husband along. But no.
You really pick up a lot from these. Is this just from body language, or are you listening? Are you pretending to have headphones in your ears and then actually have
George
it off
is very
the entire
meditative
time?
when he works
So
out.
I don't wear headphones because I don't want to like sweat in them. Mm-hmm. And I like to wear them like, during the day after I've showered. So I pick up on everything.
Okay.
And I also think it makes other people feel more uncomfortable because like when you see someone with headphones, you're like, well, I can do whatever the hell I want. But they see me, they know they can't get away with anything. This couple, this is how I knew that that he was just being dragged along. So we have this Smith machine, which is basically a barbell that's attached to the racks. So like it's technically safer. So the wife she's got a bench, and the bench is like, underneath the bar. And instead of like laying back to do a bench press or something, she is bent over on it with her like back facing the bar. She then proceeds to kick her leg back so her foot is now pressing up on the barbell. Her husband, I assume husband, because I can't imagine you'd be doing this if you weren't like obligated by law, is spotting her as she like kicks the barbell back, but she can't see what she's doing. So she's like continuously, like her foot is slipping off. The husband is like putting her foot back on the barbell, and she is getting mad because he is helping her with this exercise by, spotting the bar, and they can't really see me. I'm like on the other side. I'm listening to the whole thing. I'm just trying not to laugh.
You're recording, I assume.
I tried, but there wasn't enough people where I could have gotten away with it. Mm-hmm. It was the most awkward exercise. I've never seen this exercise before. Like just squat. Like, you're not an Olympic athlete, and the poor guy is like shorter than she is, and she's like yelling at him, and it was very sad.
God, that guy's just got a bad bounce in life, it sounds like.
You hate to see it.
You do.
It's really... so that's story number one.
Hopefully not a listener to the yeah.
I think about that sometimes, but here's
Maybe
the thing.
His wife's a listener. Actually sounds like could be more likely.
True. I'm always... Anyone that goes to the gym just go to sweat, I support that. It's the things like this where it's like... What the heck are you doing? That drive me insane. Okay, next story. This one is we're swimming yesterday, and we have to split lanes because there's a bunch of guys in there. And guy that is in my lane is basically Humpty Dumpty to the point where he's like sailing on his stomach down the lane. And he's wearing either fins on his feet or fins on his hands.
Fins on his hands, I think it was.
He was switching. So he had them all. And he was rotating in and out. So he is just cruising down the lane and just flying past me. Right now, he is taking breaks, so it's a little unfair to me, who is not taking breaks. But it was very humiliating because I would just see monstrous stomach come zooming by me with fins, and so I felt a little humiliated.
He was an example of the type of person who did not enter the water gracefully in any of his moves.
So, but here's what I want to say: if you look like Humpty Dumpty, just swim normal. Fins can go away. You don't need fins. Just get in there and swim, buddy. Okay. Now today, I thought I had enough stories, but today I witnessed true greatness. I witnessed an impromptu boxing lesson in the middle of the Cincinnati YMCA.
Like the locker room or the gym?
Impromptu.
Yep. So I'm on the rower. There's a nice open space there. A guy that I actually like, I played basketball with, nice guy, is sort of caught up in this conversation with another Y regular, older guy who just sort of walks around the whole time. They start talking about boxing. Next thing I know, they're moving around, ducking and weaving, moving and bobbing. He's talking about his jab. The old guy's like, back in the day, I used to have this move. Let me show it to you. It was 10 minutes of what I can only imagine is what they pay for on Showtime and HBO, or used to be HBO. They don't pay for it on HBO anymore. So yeah, anytime you can box.
I think the couples retreat one's my favorite.
Yeah, I have to know. So if you had enough money where you could like make your own private gym and no one was there, would you do this? Or
Neil did.
Or do you enjoy this? You secretly enjoy seeing all this, and every day you'd come here and you'd have no stories and nothing to talk about, and you'd secretly be sneaking back into the Y just so you could get some of this action.
I've never thought of that. I think as much as I'd like to say no, because I do really just enjoy the getting the workout done component, it is kind of funny.
Yeah.
Here's the bigger point though that I would make, which is I think that you should not have to spend a ton of money to be in great shape. And so it like really frustrates me when people spend inordinate amounts of money when it's like you could just go to the YMCA and get a good workout in. So I think that's what would ultimately keep me going. And I'd say that to the very end. That's why I wouldn't build my own home gym.
Right. But a man of principle.
Man of principle.
When in reality, you're just there.
Like the stories. I'm a sucker for the drama.
Neil has his own gym, and I think like the difference between him and you is totally that he doesn't enjoy watching other people as much as you do.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. It's also the tough thing is if you have a gym at your home, so you buy all this equipment, right? And when it goes like say you buy a nice barbell and a squat rack or whatever, and it's like, okay, well, I use it once a day, and then at some point something happens to it. The gym isn't replacing it; you're replacing it. It's like a real hefty investment.
No, I agree.
I do. Yoga mat, much cheaper. Much bigger fan of having the yoga in the house than the whole gym.
Yeah,
personally.
Less depreciation there for sure.
Exactly. So couples retreat, what are you going with? Couples retreat as well?
Yeah, I'd have to say, I can envision that one a little bit better. So yeah, I think so.
I've never even seen this exercise before. Honey, my foot! Stop picking up the bar. Unbelievable. That was my favorite one too. All right, that's our show. Unfortunately, you will not be back with us next week, but this was a lot of fun.
It was.
I'm looking forward to the YouTube comments that say the new podcast should be this subset of the group of three. I can't imagine that anyone will hate on me. I don't understand that. No way that'll happen. Hate mail, at PFF_Eric. See you guys later. Peace out.